use private sector more for NHS patients. This is the Labour Party saying this. And the story says, Health Minister Will Quint said the Conservatives have virtually eliminated waits of over 2 years and cut 18-month waits by 91%. He said Labour politicians were split over use of the private sector in the NHS, adding, while Labour fight with themselves over how to deliver care, we are cutting waiting lists and delivering for patients. However, Labour Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting said it's completely unjust that only those who can afford to pay to go to private are being treated on time while everyone else is left behind. Labour would use the spare capacity in the private sector to get patients seen faster. If the Conservatives had got their skates on, almost 300,000 patients could have been treated off the waiting list and back to living their lives to the full. Rishi Sunak's dither and delay is costing patients dear. So how do the private sector see the Labour Party? Well, this is what they say. Labour's last two leaders, Jeremy Corbyn and Ed Miliband, focused their election campaigns on protecting the NHS in England from privatisation. But under the new Labour government of the late 1990s and 2000s, the role of the private sector increased in the health service. David Hare, chief executive of the Independent Healthcare Providers Network, said he was pleased to see the cross-party consensus on the role private sector could play in the NHS. Bob, I'd just like you to let us know is there a positive that you can get from allowing the private hospitals to be used to cut waiting lists, or is that going to have a detrimental impact on the NHS?
Yeah, so where Streeting and Starmer seem to be trying to out-Tory the Tories. It's superficially appealing to have people who are waiting treated on the private sector, but it's based on a fallacy, the fallacy of spare capacity. A private business does not employ people or have buildings standing empty, waiting for customers. If the market isn't there, there is no spare capacity. The private sector do not employ healthcare professionals. They hire them on like a gig economy. They use them on a temporary basis. So the people they're employing are NHS professionals. And what they will be doing is sucking money out of the NHS after years of deliberately reducing the NHS capacity and presenting the private sector as a false solution. The private sector is interested in profit, and it makes the profit by cherry picking the easiest cases, and the profit is guaranteed because when things go wrong, the NHS underwrites the failure by taking on the sick patients that have been failed by the private sector. Where do they end up? They end up on intensive care units in the NHS. So this is not a solution. This is superficial flannel, which may on one level appeal to people. But if you understood how the system works, then it's completely, it's a brain dead idea. And we went through this in the early 2000s with Alan Milburn, with his concordat with the private sector, supposedly temporarily using the private sector capacity. But we know ever since that, the direction of travel has only been one way. And Labour is signalling clearly to the private health providers that, rub your hands together, lick your lips, because we're going to carry on this gravy train for you.
I mean, it does sound a bit like, that other than the toolmaker's son motif, the sticking plaster. It does sound a little bit like this sticking plaster that Keir Starmer was talking about, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a sticking plaster, and they're putting it on the wrong part of the body, right? It's insane. It doesn't work. This is what you call a zombie health policy that refuses to die. What Labour are relying on is that their voters, supporters, and members don't understand healthcare. And apart from your show, there's not many people prepared to explain what's really going on. And let's not forget who has donated to Wes Streeting and to Starmer and to other various front benchers in the shadow cabinet is people with interest in private healthcare. There is a blatant conflict of interest. They're not representing us. This isn't the solution for the NHS. What Starmer and Streeting should be saying above all else is, how do we retain the staff that we have in the NHS? and how do we achieve a pay settlement that will stop the hemorrhage?